Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. My guest on One of a Kind is the well-known and longtime resident of Iowa City, Robert Chug Wilson. For many years in Iowa City, the name Wilson was synonymous with the words sporting goods. Chug's father opened Wilson's Sporting Goods store in 1945 at 24 South Dubuque Street. At one time or another, each member of the family worked in the store. Now when you hear the name Wilson, apples come to mind. In the late summer and fall, the 40 acres of apple trees at Wilson's orchard are a favorite destination for people of all ages. Chug and his wife Joyce own the business. Chug Wilson was born in Evansville, Indiana in 1929. He and his family moved to Iowa City in 1943. He graduated from City High, where he ran track and played football. Entering the University of Iowa with a major in general science, Chug played football as a walk-on. He eventually got a scholarship playing under Dr. Eddie Anderson and Leonard Raffensperger. Chug and his wife purchased the present property of Wilson's Orchard in 1980. A barn was erected in 1985 to house the tractors. Eventually, living quarters were built above the barn, and they moved in 1990. They're very proud of their over 150 varieties of apples. Chug and Joyce have 4 sons, Bob and Jim, Scott and Dan. And according to the Wilsons, their dog Hawkeye is the star attraction at the orchard. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you.
I know your story begins in Iowa City in 1943 when your family moved here. What brought them here, Chug?
John was, World War II was on, and my father was a physical educator. He's director of physical education in Evansville Public Schools in Indiana. And the Navy went out and recruited physical educators and coaches and even pro athletes from around the country to run an accelerated physical education program for naval aviators. And the ones that could finish that course got to go on to flight school.
So the flight school was
at Iowa.
Iowa.
The Seahawks were here, and they lived in they had both the quadrangle and Hillcrest. And the cadets lived there, and they used the field house and of course the athletic fields around there too.
And your whole family moved with him?
Oh yes.
It was you, your older brother,
yes,
and your younger sister.
Yes.
Okay, and so then he came and decided that he liked Iowa City so much that he'd stay, or what happened?
John liked pheasant hunting so well.
Now, John is John Senior.
John, my father. Yeah.
John, your father. Okay.
Yeah. He was so impressed with the pheasant hunting here and the fact that it was a nice small college town, and we lived in southern Indiana on the river, which I thought was a lot of fun, but John didn't think it was quite as nice as Iowa City.
So how did he decide to do the sporting goods store?
Well, he had been considering entering a sporting goods business with a dealer down in Evansville before the war. And there was no sporting goods store in Iowa City, so he looked at that opportunity and borrowed money on his house, and one of the bankers would lend him some money, I think with about $10,000, which
Really?
doesn't go very far nowadays. Started the store.
And you all worked in the store?
Yep.
Each one in the family?
Yep.
Now, you both, your brother and, did your brother play at City High?
Yes, yes. He was, Tug was 2 years older than me. And when we showed up for football at City High for the first time, Jim Sangster, who was our quarterback, and Jim and I were in the same class. Tug was 2 years older, but the sports writer in Evansville had written to the Press Citizen, and there were a couple articles about Chug Wilson coming to town. So Jim had heard of Chug Wilson. He says, "Oh, you're Chug Wilson's brother. You must be Chug."
And boy, did that nickname stick.
It sure did. Hardly anyone knows my real name.
I know it, it's Robert, but we'll call you Chug today.
Okay.
Well, how did your older brother John get the nickname Tug?
Well, our grandfather had that name. Our great-grandfather came from England. And apparently there was an old English boxer, Chug Wilson. And our grandfather, which I never knew this till later, that they called him Tug. And our father called his son, who was John Jr., Tug.
You played in the very famous, there was a big article this fall in the Press Citizen about the 1946 City High football team. And you were on it with Jim Sangster as the quarterback, correct?
Right.
So what happened that you were the state champions?
Well, it was a mythical state champion.
Mythical.
Yeah.
There's a story to this now.
We were the Mississippi Valley champs. We beat Davenport, Clinton, Dubuque, 4 Cedar Rapids schools, and Moline and us were the Mississippi Valley at that time. And we won that conference. We also played Burlington, which won the Little Six or something. It's a Tumwa and Fairfield and those schools. And then Dowling of Des Moines came down here, and we beat them. And Dowling had beat everyone in Des Moines, and Sioux City and Council Bluffs schools. So we beat everyone that beat everyone. And that's how they selected us as the state champs.
The state champion. And you went off to Iowa and
Yes.
wanted to play some more football, and you were a walk-on, and you eventually got a scholarship. There's a story in that, isn't there? What happened?
Well, if you're there long enough,
Oh, come on.
Well, it's true. No, I just started attending, and if you go to practice every day,
Show up.
You eventually, in fact, Sangster and I are having an argument right now. I actually lettered for 4 years. And he says, no, this report says it's only 3 years. And I stayed an extra semester. I didn't play any of my sophomore year. And to my surprise, they gave me a letter.
They gave you.
And I redshirted myself because I didn't play that sophomore year. I kept a class or two from graduation, and so after 4 years, I went 4.5 years. And
That's why you have letters.
that's
from
where the fourth year came.
Fourth year. Now, the Korean War began and interrupted your education.
It didn't interrupt us at that time, Ellen. It happened between our sophomore and junior years, and if we would sign up for advanced ROTC, we were allowed to stay in college. Otherwise, you're drafted. So as I mentioned, all us cowards signed up for ROTC.
And you went to flight?
Well, after you stayed in college and got my commission, and then went to fight school, which is the only way to go to fight school, because you go through in grade, you don't have the hazing and so forth. You go through as an officer, you get officer's pay, fight pay, and all the other benefits.
That was down in Arizona?
We started in Arizona.
You drove that fancy
Yes.
little car?
I had a little Model A Sport Coupe, 1929, with steer horns on the front that blinked right and left for turn signals. And I drove that down there, and one of my instructors bought it from me down there for like $500, which I think I'd paid like, well, my dad bought it for me for maybe $85 or something like this.
So you, after this experience and in college, what did you want to do? What did you think was out there for you?
When I graduated from college, I really liked architecture. I graduated in general science. When I went to college, my dad said, just take whatever you want, and you're going to come in the store. Well, so I took general science. And but when I knew I was going to be called to the Air Force, but they hadn't sent me any orders. So I went up to Iowa State to check on their architectural school. And when I got back, I had my orders to report to the Air Force. So that curtailed my architectural career.
So when did the apple business get into your blood?
Well, that was interesting. Probably back in the 1960s. Went to the grocery store and selected some apples from a display of Red Delicious apples. In there was a different looking apple than a Red Delicious. I picked it up and put it in the bag anyway and took it home. I decided I'll try that one first. And I have to tell you, I'd never tasted such a good apple in my life. I have no idea what it was. I rushed back to the store, got the kid in the produce department, said, where did these apples come from? He said, in this box in the back room. So we went back, and it's just a box in the back room. He had no idea, and I still have no idea, but at that time I knew there are some good apples in this world.
Aren't there?
Yeah, and so we later on, towards the end of that decade, we decided that we'd move to Florida, to Vero Beach, and that I would get in the fiberglass business. I can't believe I was this naive. And we went down there and stayed there a year. Spent most of my time growing trees and so forth like this. Citrus and mangoes and avocados and so forth. But we came back for spring break so the kids could see their buddies in school. And Jerry Hilgenberg and I were on the team together at Iowa and good friends. And I told Jerry, by the time we'd committed to move to Florida, the prices on the ocean and on the river were very expensive, beyond our means. But there was a lot on the river which we were considering buying and building on. We lived on the island there. He said, what's the lot sell for? I said, 22 or 23,000. He says, for that you can buy a whole acreage up here. I said, show me some. So we went out that day.
In Iowa City.
In Iowa City, and he showed me a couple of lots. And I called the bank. Jim Sangster was my banker, and of course he was on vacation, fortunately. And Bob Sirk, who was kind of an assistant to Jim at the time. And Bob, I said to Bob, would you guys consider lending me any money to buy some land up here? He says, why, certainly. Of course, Sangster, of course, really got after him on that when he got back. But anyway, so we made an offer, and this was Barney Beeler, who was a former developer here and needed some money. He was living in Florida himself, and we made him an offer, and he took us up on it. So this locked us into moving back to Iowa City. We were just in Florida a year.
And that must have been 1979,
That would have
80?
been 1973.
Oh, 73.
And this land was 20 acres. This wasn't the current orchard. And we started planting trees. I went down to the local nurseries and bought all the fruit trees they had when we came back that June. They were in pots, so you could plant them that late. And then every winter after Christmas, the new catalogs would come out. And so I was buying all these collection of trees, and started attending fruit and vegetable growers meetings. And this one elderly gentleman said, you should go to the one at the Johnson County. And so I went to there. And I saw him there, and he says, you need to go to the one in Des Moines, which was the state meeting. So we did that. And in February of 1980, Joyce and I were driving back from the state meeting, and I said, you know, this looks like so much fun. There were two people on the program up there with show and tells of their operations, which were both U-Pick operations. And we got back, and we discussed about doing this, and it was kind of a long story, but I saw a person that I knew, John Hagmeyer from West Liberty. The last time I knew, he was the city manager over there, and he used to swindle me out of sporting goods when he was in charge of their physical education program. And anyway, he said he was in real estate now, and I said to him, John, would you have any old farms over there? They could be hilly, they don't have to be real fertile and stuff. He says, I'll look. And he called me at the sporting goods store at Sycamore Mall one time, about a week later. He says, I've got something to show you. I said, fine, I'll be right over. He says, no, I'll come pick you up. I said, John, I can leave right now. I'll be right over. He says, I've got to come to Iowa City anyway. So he comes to Iowa City and picks me up and takes me about 2 miles from where we lived. Where we lived, Dan and Kathy Gable bought from us. Was 20 acres there, 22 or 23. And but he took us over to this other place, and there was ice on the creek with a big crack in it, and looking down through there was this crystal clear water with rock underneath it. And I just, at that time, I knew,
That was it?
this, I had to be very cool about this. But John was on our side. He wrote up an offer that had provisions for the neighbors at the highway, allowing us to put a sign up and all this kind of stuff. And Bill Mirden was my attorney. He says, do you want the place or not, Wilson? And I said, we really want it. He said, well, forget all that stuff. So anyway, we made offers, and counter offers were made, and we ended up buying that, the current 87 acres, yes. So that's how we actually got in. We started planting in the spring of 1980, and we sold our first apples in 1986. And
you mentioned Joyce, your wife, and she's been with you in this step-by-step, elbow to elbow in this. I've seen her, selling turnovers and apples, and so what did she think about getting into the apple orchard? Was she as excited as you, or?
Well, I think originally she was. As she gained some maturity, that's what my cardiologist explains when you develop certain conditions, that when you obtain a certain maturity.
Okay.
She may not have been quite as excited about it, but it's been I'm sure she likes it too, although she thinks she should retire. This is ridiculous, of course.
Well, you've been in it 20, well, you started selling in 86, and
yeah.
It's becoming so very popular with all ages. How do you decide what varieties to plant?
Well, we went out and bought everything that looked good. Now, some experts said there's probably over 7,000 named varieties worldwide.
7,000?
Yes, apple varieties. This goes back to the time, and before the turn of the last century, the main drink in the United States was apple cider. And everyone had an orchard. Almost everyone was a farmer back then. And they'd take seeds and plant them out. So there's zillions of, each seed will be different from an apple tree. To make the same type of tree, you have to take scion wood from the type of tree you want to duplicate and put it on another apple rootstock. So there are literally zillions of different type of apples. However, some stand above all the rest. And we think we have a collection that we probably have about 50 different trees that are really, really good. And probably the rest we could do without. But there are some that are so much better than other apples, they totally eclipse them.
All right, tell me, for our viewers,
Yes.
what are the favorites? Is it September Gold one of the favorites?
Well, that Song of September.
A Song of September, excuse me. Song of September, not September Gold.
A Song of September, and Ellen, since this could be important to some people who don't have that, it's actually Minnesota's Sweet 16.
Oh.
And no one's heard of that either, see. And so we thought we would be very sly and camouflage the name so not everyone would be planting orchards of Song of September. And it's a little more schmaltzy, Song of September. And but you really don't have to worry in this business because it takes so long to get into it, and there's so much work involved and so forth that
there's not a lot of competition.
There's not a lot of competition. And so we have over 600 trees of that. It's so good. And
Is that people's favorite, or do you have a favorite?
That is
Is that
the
the favorite
one of most of our customers at this time. Now the brand new Honey Crisp, that was introduced in 1970, I think, by the way, by Minnesota. At this time, they also introduced one in 1992 called Honey Crisp. And Honey Crisp is the crispest apple in the world. Now the flavor isn't as broad and so forth as some of these others. But it's so crisp and will store forever. In the refrigerator, and next April still tastes like it just came off the tree. They've discovered on laboratory analysis the cells are twice as large as any other apple. It's a cross of Minnesota's Honey Gold and McCowan.
Do people ask, does it make good sauce, applesauce,
Oh,
or is
yes.
it the eating apple?
It-
I mean, don't
it-
people ask you, now I'm going to make pies, what's the apple to buy for pies? What's the apple
Well,
to buy for applesauce?
it depends on what time of year.
Okay.
In other words, the Song of September makes excellent sauce and excellent pie, and it's excellent to eat out of hand. But it ripens right in the middle of September. Now, before that, there's
In late August?
well, yeah, in late August there's one called Burgundy. Now, it won't have the fantastic flavor. It's very tart. It's a Super Jonathan, and Jonathan's a grandparent in it. And it makes great pies. You can't tell it isn't Jonathan apple pie. At this time of year, Spy Gold, and Spy Gold and Jonna Gold are both introductions from New York State at Geneva. And they are probably the two best flavored apples in the world.
Spygold.
Spygold and Jonagold.
Jonagold.
And there's that much difference between the Spygold and Jonagold. And there's about that much difference between that and the Song of September. Now the Honey Crisp is a little bit further down, but still very, very good and explosive though, and crisp. So it may indeed replace Red Delicious, because over 1 million of those trees have been put in the ground in the last 5 years' time. A trade magazine 2 years ago said that 875,000 have been planted in the recent years. So I'm sure it's over 1 million now.
Who gets to name these? I mean, think of the beautiful names of, we've got Fuji and Gala, and there's even one called Spitzenberg, and a Song of September. I think you named that one, but Spygold and Jonagold, and one that I'd never heard of, Johnalicious. That's another name, and Red Baron. And who gets to name the apples?
Well, the developers. Whoever develops them usually names them. And some of them, like Spygold, it's a cross of Northern Spy and Golden Delicious, but doesn't really radiate any, schmaltz, if you will. And it is just a fantastically well-balanced apple with a lot of acid and a lot of sugar and a lot of all the in-between stuff that make an apple good. And it's a very large apple, by the way. It may be too large for some people to eat, but it's the very best.
You're having lots of fun, and I know the children are, on your tractor, pulling these children up and down the acres and acres. And do they ask questions, or do they just want to get to the tree and pick it off that dwarf tree?
Well, they get some coaching from the teachers and so forth, and their keepers. I mean, their trainers. I mean,
yeah, right.
And we kind of spoof them a little bit about the alligators in the creek, and now we're taking them. Well, we take them to Niagara Falls West, which is the only rock waterfall in Iowa City. It's on our property.
Very good.
It's a rapid about that high, and some kids will walk out on the bridge and say, "Where is it?" And of course we have this little mowed out place that going into the woods, which we tell them is Robin Hood's secret hideout. And they eat that stuff up, and so we one kid said one time, "Well, where's Captain Hook's secret hideout?" So I had to come up with something real fast. There's a deer stand over on the other side of the property, which we went by. And
that was Captain Hook's.
Yeah.
And do they get to pick an apple off the tree, or what?
Well, we try and restrain them. If the group is small enough, we have enough apples, I'll go and have another adult or so help pick, and we'll give them an apple. Kids pick apples randomly. The best description is they Easter egg hunt apples. If it looks like an apple, no matter what tree it is, or it's on the ground or in the weeds or something, yeah, it's an apple. And they pick them, and they, instead of putting them in the basket carefully, it's usually and it's our toughest problem, because we want it to be a family operation for families to come, but kids are indiscriminate, and I've seen some real garbage apples come in to the sales room, and it can't be real good for the families when they get them home. But they want the kids to pick them. And I try and tell them, it's kind of like going in for brain surgery. You normally don't have the kids do it.
That's good. Well, it's getting more, I know you're having more and more children and families come out, and it's a wonderful thing in the fall to do. And what a great product that you sell. You know, the old adage, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and they're saying now that there is scientific proof that an apple a day does, you know, help your health greatly. So it must be very satisfying to be in this business, even though you said once that it's the most regressive business, apple industry is.
In other words, almost anyone that would start an orchard today would probably go out and buy a bunch of Red Delicious trees. And I told my sons, if someone wanted to put an orchard across the road from us, I'd buy the trees if they'd plant Red Delicious. Because I consider we're designing our competition. And I say it's regressive in that respect. There isn't a lot of evaluation beforehand to see what is really good. And people will stick with the main apple that other orchards in Iowa grow are usually Jonathan. Now, Jonathan's a good apple, but there's some better ones now. And very few people go around and do their homework on it. Well, all the catalogs, every apple is the best apple that in the description, but they all grow differently in different parts of the country.
Is that what you do over the winter when your orchard is covered with snow and the trees are dormant? Do you pour over catalogs like most gardeners do? And
well, not really. We have most of our trees in the ground, and the trade magazines and so forth will alert you to new varieties which you should be checking out. In those off-season times, people say, you know, what do you do? Go south? And we have, well, during the season we're open every day, 10 till dusk, August, September, and October. So I don't even get to, I cord the cash register once a week and put that in an envelope. At the end of the year, I'll make a spreadsheet and do the sales about what we sold when, and so that takes a few weeks or so to do this, or a month or so. Then we have to do the same thing with our expenses, our checking account. You don't have a time to.
No, not during the season.
No, and
so you repair things and organize things for the following season.
You gotta. You do have to make plans for the next season.
When can you get into the orchard? When are you into the orchards in the spring?
Well, usually in March or so we can get out there. And some people prune right on through the winter in their orchards. And it's kind of, you know, I don't know if it's all that smart or not. You can open up those wounds to cold injury. And a lot of trees already are very prone to cold damage. Our blushing golden and Jana gold have huge branches that just die from the cold. And pruning them opens them up to more damage.
Tell me, Joyce, as I mentioned before, has been with you from day one with this. And how did you meet her? Did you meet her in school, or did you meet her at...
Well, when I got out of the Air Force and came back to Iowa, a friend of mine from Dubuque, there in this Mississippi Valley Conference, we knew the other kids from the other schools, and a kid named Wayne Evenson from Dubuque was in school down here. And his now wife but at that time his fiance was a nurse, and she knew Joyce, and they fixed us up on a blind date.
Blind date.
Yeah. And I've been telling Joyce ever since, she's the luckiest girl in Iowa City. She says, you make me ill.
She probably feels she's the luckiest when the season is winding down and she's not having to oversee all those wonderful apple pies and turnovers that are made out there. My last question that I wanted to ask you, and I ask this to all of my guests, is looking back, Chug, Who or what has had a major influence on you?
Well, there's, of course, my father starting off, but we lived in southern Indiana. I can remember we moved up on the Ohio River in a little town called Newburgh outside of Evansville. And that was really a lot of fun. We had a boat.
You liked living on the river.
Yeah, it was, and the town was so small, everyone knew everyone. And we would, us guys would, right across the street from our home was, well, on one side was the river and the library lawn, which was we'd play capture the flag almost every night, you know, in the summer months, and that was a lot of fun, experience-wise. And then getting to high school, having great coaches like Wally Swank and Herb Cormack were obviously an influence, and our principal, Fred Jones. I might add, I never, ever heard any of those gentlemen use a swear word. I don't think that's common now.
It was that rural setting in Indiana and being outside,
Yeah.
and you've obviously loved the outdoors and all of your life. And look where you are now.
It's the you can be outdoors almost any day and every day, and that's, you know, Ellen, when you're out driving your tractor and the sun's setting in the west, and you know, it's so spectacular that
you probably feel you're just one lucky man.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we're lucky that you're here in our community, and thank you for being the guest today.
Thank you for having me come.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Robert Chug Wilson. On an autumn day, the young and the not so young have made Wilson's Orchard their destination. The excitement of sampling and then picking a peck of apples brings folks back year after year. For over 15 years, Chug has given orchard tours to preschoolers and kindergartners and first and second graders, as well as other community groups. Chug calls his apple orchard, and I quote, a one-horse mom and pop operation. All our sons have helped, and some of our friends too, end quote. His wife, Joyce, has been a partner in this business from day one. Anyone who has had the pleasure of meeting and talking with Chug Wilson would agree that he is one of a kind.